In this lesson, we'll continue to develop the site model by adding detail to the ground and the bridges. Now, just before I work on the ground, I'd like to just show you the building as it has been developed slightly. And all I have really done since the end of the last lesson was continue to add a few more polys by holding down Shift and dragging edges out and bridging those loose edges so that I get this very simple boxed representation of our building. One thing that I realized when I looked at it in perspective was that it has actually been modeled. If I look in the side view, it has been modeled off the zero plane upwards, so the ground is actually much higher than the building. So what we need to do is just move this building up. I believe it is by 8 meters, and now it will be sitting on top of the actual ground plane, which is up here. So if we go back into our perspective view, now that we've moved it upwards, we just need to adjust that position slightly on the camera, but no real effect there because the building itself has still been correctly modeled according to the reference, and that's the main thing to keep in mind. Now if I start to look at the actual site mesh, we need to make a few adjustments so that we have this difference in height. That is really the main thing that I want to show, because it's going to be quite a key feature so that people can move down from the museum down onto the expo platform that we're busy building. So instead of all of these polys, or all of these editable polys and extrude modifiers that we have working on top of our editable spline, we can go and delete these now because we don't necessarily need them, and we can move this spline up by 8 meters so that it is at the right height for the base of the building. So you can see in the section over here, or the elevation, the front view, that is our ground plane. So what I can do now is add a new editable poly onto that, and I can start to work on this plane according to this reference image. So pretty much the same thing we've done with the building will now be done to this ground plane. So the first thing I want to do is to adjust this edge so that it moves back to the edge that we see here, so that we have the right relationship. Also, if you do have a more accurate plan, then I would rather trust the plan to feed you this information instead of a reference photo, because for example, this face over here is actually at 90 degrees to this one, but the perspective of the image is slightly distorted in these photos. So rather use proper plan references and guides to help you decide or see how far certain elements are, widths of roads and all of these elements. Don't just do that all according to the reference photo. But anyhow, I'm just going to use this difference in height to work from that reference image. So now I'm going to go to my top view. So I'm going to hit T, enter, and let's just work in these two views at the same time. I can now click on the vertices that are over here, and I can start to just slightly adjust them so that they are a little bit more similar to the photo. Remember again that if we had an accurate plan, which we didn't really, we were working off a Google photo, which isn't always very, very accurate either. We basically will have the luxury of working with this background image in such a loose way. Now the next thing we want to do is to create a edge which is going to create the site split. So we want to basically take this edge and the one at the back, right click and connect them, and then just working with that vertice, let's just constrain it to the edge so that the vertice doesn't distort our entire shape, and let's just align it so that we can see it looking correct there. Then I'm going to take this Y value, copy it by typing Control-C, and I'm going to paste it into that spinner there. So that has now created this straight line, which is going to be the edge of where this high road meets this wall and where this lower road then goes down. Next, I need to take this edge that we've just added in, right click and split it, and that's going to allow me to basically disjoin these two polys from each other. And now I want to add a second vertice right about over there, so I can actually just right click on the edge and click select vertex. I can either do it like so, and next I'm going to do the same thing to this area. I'm going to add another vertex, and this is going to now be an area where we can go and connect it, and this will be a flat area, and then over here we will have the slope downwards. So this poly now can go and be moved. So let's just do that in perspective so it's easy to see. And I'm going to convert my poly selection to a vertice selection by holding down Control and clicking on vertex. And I want to move everything down except for these two, which are going to stay. So let's now undo that constraint and move that down slightly. So what we can do here is that we can move it all to 0, and let's just make it 1 meter above the water. Next, it would be a good idea to add another vertex more or less in that position. So if I look at the x coordinates, I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to add another vertice round about there, and I'm going to paste that figure, right click and connect these two. Then I'm going to make sure that this one is at 1 meter as well, so that we have a nice flat surface in this area. So what you'll see that we created is basically a object where this entire poly has been dropped down, and we've created this ramp here. You'll see that we need to connect a few more edges into the actual form so that we don't have a situation like this happening. So all we need to do here is to right click on 2 edges, connect them. We can make this a little bit straighter for ourselves. Let's just go and add an edge constraint and scale it so that we have them looking nice and neat. And immediately by doing so, I'm now going to weld these 2 edges, these 2 vertices together. We see that we have 2. So let's weld those together. Now we have 1. And you'll see that you don't have any of those incorrect results when you look at your poly in your viewport. So now if I go back to my view, you can see that we can start to make some other adjustments to the actual edge of our shoreline. We can move this back slightly. Let's just undo our constraints again. Let's move that back. And we can also move this in. So I'm going to take that entire edge and just move it slightly towards us to make it a little bit narrower. And there we have it. So at this point you can now go in and start to add your verticals. So you can either do it in a separate editable poly if you like. For example, you could take that entire edge and this entire border, and you could just do a very quick shortcut by dragging everything vertically downwards. Then you could convert that entire selection, because it's not all at the same height, to a vertice selection, holding down Control, and then just hit Z or Z on your Make Planar button. You could then just right click your spinner here to zero that all out. And there we go. What we've done is we've just very quickly gone and modeled the ground plane, and we can also go and now add more detail to the bridges too. So in the case of the bridges, let's just isolate those, and let's first of all neaten them up slightly so we can make them planar in the Y direction. And I'm just going to work on one to quickly show you the way that I would very simply and quickly create a low poly bridge that we can use in our site model. Now I would take these 2 vertices, each pair at a time, and right click and connect them, and the last pair here, and you can then take your central area, move it up slightly. Let's say you're going to move it to 10 meters, and then the rest of the bridge stays as is. Then for the depth of the bridge, let's add another editable poly. I'm going to select the entire border, drag it down slightly, and if you like, what you can do instead of doing this method is you can also just shell it if you are in a big hurry, and shelling it does speed things up quite a lot as well. So let's just say we're going to add a 2-meter shell, and that's just going to create a very simple object. If you do have more time and you want to go into a higher level of detail, then I would go and model in the individual arches for these bridges and make them look a little bit more realistic. Don't forget as well that now that we've adjusted this edge to our river, that we need to adjust the edge to our water as well. If you don't want to do that the long way, what you can do is on the editable spline, just select all the edges, or the vertices rather, that are in the wrong place, hit delete on your keyboard, and then just move out the entire object so that it covers, so it basically penetrates the entire ground surface, and then the whole surface can be textured as water in one go. So that pretty much covers it for this lesson. We've gone and looked at how we can use the reference image to add a little bit more detail to our site. So we've basically used that image to really adjust the fine edges, or the massing for the site itself. Remember that if you do have accurate plans, rather use those. I do repeat that again and again because the plans will be much better to work with than a perspective. But I mainly just wanted to show you how using that reference image can drive your basic site model and context model for your architectural work. In the next lesson, we're going to be modeling up our actual platform, and then we're going to set up our scene so we can render out a few test shots and start to experiment with form on that Expo Pavilion. Thank you.